"Step away from the car, ma'am." The officer's voice was sharp, a blade cutting through the crisp afternoon air. Shoppers turned, eyes widening, fingers twitched, phones rose, the crowd held its breath. "You don't look like someone who owns this ride." Officer Daniel Price's hand hovered near his holster, his gaze locked on the gleaming 1967 Mustang, a beast of polished steel and rumbling power. And standing beside it, Judge Maya Carter. Though no one knew that yet. She stood calm, composed, dressed in jeans and a blazer. She might have been anyone, but the way she held herself, like a storm waiting to break, hinted at something deeper. A hush rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked, phones went live. What started as a routine parking lot stop was about to become a career-ending mistake, broadcast to thousands in real time. But before we go any further, drop a comment, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. Because tomorrow, this story gets even bigger. The murmur of weekend shoppers floated through the open-air plaza, a chorus of chatter, laughter, and clinking coffee cups. That was before the sudden snap of authority cut through the hum like a whip. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle now." The words came from a tall figure in a dark navy uniform, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the sky. Officer Trent Maddox's voice was not loud, but it carried a cold precision that instantly froze movement in the nearby parking spaces. His right hand hovered near the clasp of his holster, not touching it, but close enough that the implication was clear. Janelle Harris, standing beside the deep blue 1968 Pontiac GTO, turned slowly. She had been checking the stitching on the driver's seat, a habit left over from the years she'd spent restoring the car with her father, when she realized the officer was looking at her as though she'd been caught mid-crime. Calm, measured, "I'm sorry. Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice level, though there was an unmistakable steel beneath the politeness. "This vehicle matches a stolen car report filed earlier this week," Maddox replied, taking 2 slow steps toward her. The badge on his chest caught a glint of sunlight. "I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them." Around them, the casual flow of Saturday life faltered. People slowed their steps. Heads turned. Someone near the cafe nudged their friend and tilted a phone camera toward the scene. Within seconds, a semicircle of onlookers began to form. The easy laughter of a moment ago evaporated, replaced by the tense air of an audience anticipating a confrontation. Janelle's lips parted as if to speak, but instead she exhaled, letting her hands rise to shoulder height. Steady, controlled. "You think this is a stolen car?" "I don't think," Maddox said. "I follow procedure, and procedure says a car matching this description was reported missing. Blue GTO, custom plates, leather interior. That sound like this one." Janelle's gaze flicked to the hood, where sunlight shimmered on the glossy paint she'd personally buffed just this morning. Every inch of the car was pristine, cared for with a devotion that bordered on reverence. "It sounds exactly like this one," she said evenly, "because it is this one, and it's mine." Maddox's expression didn't shift. "Registration, proof of purchase, insurance card." "In my briefcase," she said, nodding toward the passenger seat. Through the closed window, the black leather case was just visible. The gold-embossed seal on its flap caught the light, but not enough for the officer to see its detail from his angle. A murmur passed through the crowd. A teenager in a red hoodie whispered something into his phone. A second later, the faint robotic tone of a live-stream notification pinged from multiple devices. The audience was growing, not just here, but online. "Ma'am," Maddox said, the edge in his voice sharpening, "you can tell it to the detectives, hands on the hood." Her jaw tightened. This was a scene she had watched play out for others too many times. She had sat on the bench in her black robe, hearing testimony about traffic stops gone wrong, about assumptions made in the span of a heartbeat. And now, on a Saturday afternoon in a shopping plaza, she was on the receiving end of one. Measured, deliberate, slowly, she stepped forward and placed her palms on the warm steel of the hood. The crowd drew in closer, the air thickening with unspoken judgments. A woman at the back called out, "She hasn't even," but her voice was swallowed by the rising murmur. "Where exactly was this car stolen from?" Janelle asked, without turning her head. "Downtown," Maddox said. "3 days ago. You fit the general description from the witness." "What description is that?" she asked. He hesitated for the briefest moment, but his answer was matter of fact. Black female, mid-40s, average height, seen driving a blue GTO. Her fingers flexed against the metal. "That's all." "That's enough to check it out," he said. 20 feet away, a young man in cargo shorts adjusted his phone on a stabilizer, ensuring a steady live stream feed. Comments scrolled so fast he didn't bother to read them all. Phrases like, "Here we go again," and "Stay safe, sis," flashing past. The viewer count ticked upward, 3 digits becoming 4. "Officer, may I reach for my phone to call my—" "No," Maddox cut in, "not until we sort this out." Janelle swallowed back the retort that pressed against her lips. She could see, through the corner of her eye, an older man in a straw hat pushing his way toward the front of the crowd. He moved with urgency, but a male security guard intercepted him halfway, murmuring something that made him throw up his hands in frustration. Inside the GTO, the black briefcase waited. Inside that, her identification card, the one that could have ended this entire situation in 10 seconds. But experience told her that sudden moves, even toward exoneration, could become dangerous in the wrong atmosphere. The young man with the stabilizer shifted, angling for a shot of her face. His followers were eating this up. The comments turned from curiosity to outrage as snippets of dialogue became clear. Someone typed, "This is racial profiling 101, and another replied, "Record everything." A second officer appeared at the edge of the crowd, a woman with cropped hair and a wary look. She began getting people back, creating a loose perimeter. Her gaze swept over Janelle, lingered for half a second on the car, then moved back to Maddox. "You've got quite an audience," she said to him. "Not my fault people can't mind their business," he muttered. Then to Janelle, "You ever been arrested before?" She tilted her head slightly. "Why would that matter right now?" "It gives me a sense of the situation," he said, his tone clipped. Her mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile. "No, officer, I've never been arrested." The crowd shifted, a low ripple of discontent moving through them. Several people held their phones higher. Somewhere behind them, the low hum of a news van engine reached the parking lot. Janelle's pulse was steady, but not because she felt safe. It was steady because she'd learned long ago that composure was a shield, and right now, she needed it more than ever. The faint whir of the news van's camera crane rising into position carried across the lot. Even without looking, Janelle could tell they were focusing on her and Maddox. The same tableau she'd presided over countless times in court, a suspect and an officer, only now she was in the role she had so often watched from the bench. The woman officer had finished pushing the nearest cluster of spectators back about 3 feet. It didn't make much difference. They leaned forward again almost immediately. "We're getting calls from dispatch about this stop," she said quietly to Maddox. "It's trending already." He gave a terse nod, but his jaw tightened. "We're in the middle of an investigation, Tors, let me handle it." Janelle caught the name, Tors, a younger officer, likely less than a decade on the force. The way she scanned the crowd told Janelle she was fully aware of the optics here, even if Maddox wasn't or refused to be. "Ma'am," Tors said to Janelle in a more measured tone, "do you have any form of identification on you at all?" "I do," Janelle replied, "in my briefcase, inside the vehicle." Maddox shot Tors a sharp look. "She's not retrieving anything. I'll get it when we're ready." "It's a closed case," Janelle said mildly, "and it contains documents covered under attorney-client privilege and judicial confidentiality. If you open it without a warrant, you'll violate state and federal law." That brought a flicker of hesitation to Tors' face. "She's right," Tors murmured to Maddox. "We can't just—" "We can if the vehicle's suspected stolen," Maddox interrupted. "That's probable cause." The crowd didn't need microphones to catch his voice. A few gasps sounded from the back. Someone shouted, "That's not how the law works." The comments section of the live stream scrolled like a slot machine. #know your rights. This is why we film. Blue GTO flooding the feed. A figure broke from the rear and moved toward the front, an older woman in a navy coat, hair silver under the sun. Her eyes locked on Janelle, and for an instant recognition passed between them. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but Maddox barked, "Step back, ma'am. This is an active police investigation." The older woman stopped mid-step, her jaw tightening. She looked like she might argue, but Tor's subtle shake of the head dissuaded her. The heat radiating off the hood seeped into Janelle's palms, but she didn't shift her hands. She knew every detail of her position right now mattered, the calm posture, the measured breathing, the visible compliance. Every movement could be weaponized in the narrative later, and she had no intention of giving Maddox any ammunition beyond what his own assumptions already loaded. From the far side of the plaza came the wail of another siren. A second patrol car turned into the lot, its lights casting alternating bands of red and blue over the faces of the crowd. A sergeant stepped out, broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair visible even from here. "What have we got, Maddox?" the sergeant asked, scanning the scene with eyes that seemed to take in far more than he acknowledged aloud. "Possible stolen vehicle," Maddox replied crisply. "Subject matches witness description, no proof of ownership provided." Janelle's gaze met the sergeant's. Something in his expression shifted, like a shadow crossing glass. He looked at her a beat longer than necessary, and she saw the faint spark of recognition that he quickly masked. "Let's keep this orderly," he said, but his voice lacked the hard edge of Maddox. Torres moved toward him, speaking in a low voice Janelle couldn't catch, but Maddox's sharp retort carried, "I'm in control here." The sergeant's eyes flicked to the growing number of camera phones, then to the news crew now just 20 feet away. "Control isn't the point right now, Maddox. Optics matter. Policy matters." The word optics seemed to irritate Maddox even more. He adjusted his stance, squaring off toward Janelle like a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument. "Where did you get this vehicle?" Janelle turned her head slightly toward him, her voice as calm as if she were on the bench. "From my father's garage. He owned it for 40 years before I inherited it." "That's a nice story," Maddox said flatly, "but anyone can make claims. We need documentation." "You've been told where the documentation is," she said evenly. "You've also been told the legal constraints on accessing it. If you proceed, you will be knowingly violating the law." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. The young man with the stabilizer swung his camera to catch Maddox's face. His viewers, over 10,000 now, were spamming the chat with, "She knows the law, and he's digging his own grave." The sergeant stepped closer to Maddox. "We need to think about next steps here before this gets any bigger." "It's already big," Torres muttered. From the back, the older woman in the navy coat called out again. "I know her." The authority in her tone cut through the noise. "That woman is." "Ma'am, I will arrest you for interfering if you do not step back," Maddox snapped, raising his voice enough to draw fresh outrage from the onlookers. The older woman's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't retreat far. She kept her eyes on Janelle, the silent recognition still there. Janelle could feel the clock ticking in her head. Somewhere not far from here, she was supposed to be in a secure conference room with her fellow justices, casting a deciding vote on a measure that could change the way law enforcement operated statewide. That window was closing fast. "Sergeant," Torres said quietly, "I think we need to at least verify her ID before we escalate further." Maddox's head turned sharply. "We don't bend procedure just because a crowd thinks we should." "This isn't about bending procedure," Torres replied. "It's about preventing a lawsuit in the making." Her words landed like a stone dropped in water, the ripples visible in the shifting expressions of the crowd. Several people repeated, "lawsuit," in hushed tones. The sergeant exhaled. Maddox stepped back for a second. "I'll talk to her." "I have this under control," Maddox said again, but his voice lacked the certainty of before. Not anymore, you don't, the sergeant said, his tone firm enough to make even the most stubborn officer take half a step back. The crowd's energy shifted. It wasn't relief yet, but the possibility of de-escalation had entered the air. The livestream's chat feed exploded with, "Here we go, let the Sarge handle it," and finally someone with sense. Janelle didn't move her hands from the hood. She knew better than to assume the tone had changed permanently, but she met the sergeant's gaze directly. "You're going to want to hear exactly who I am," she said. The sergeant's gaze lingered on Janelle's face for a moment that seemed longer than the time it took. In that pause, something unspoken passed, recognition, perhaps, or at least the uneasy sense that there was far more to this encounter than Maddox's terse summary had suggested. "All right," he said, voice low but steady, "let's take this one step at a time. Ma'am, you're saying the documentation to prove ownership is inside the car?" "Yes," Janelle replied, "inside that black leather briefcase on the passenger seat. If you allow me to retrieve it, this entire scene ends in seconds." Maddox snorted. "Ends in seconds if she's telling the truth. Ends in a chase if she bolts." The murmur in the crowd thickened, a blend of disbelief and irritation. Someone near the back shouted, "She's not running anywhere." Another voice followed, "You're embarrassing yourself, man." Tor's jaw tightened as she glanced toward the news camera, now positioned at a perfect angle to capture Maddox's expression. The lens seemed to drink in every twitch, every shadow of doubt or stubbornness that crossed his face. The sergeant held up a hand. "We're not here to escalate. Maddox, stand down." "You can't just," Maddox started, but the sergeant cut him off with a look. Years of rank carried in that glance, and even Maddox's posture shifted, his weight settling reluctantly into his heels. The sound of typing came from the young man with the stabilizer as he updated his live stream title. Live, officer detains woman over her own car, crowd growing. The viewer count climbed past 14,000. Janelle took in a slow breath, not breaking eye contact with the sergeant. "I appreciate you taking the time to listen," she said, her tone as deliberate as it was in her courtroom. "Listening is part of the job," he replied, though his glance toward the crowd told her he was just as aware of the political theater unfolding here as she was. From the far side, the older woman in the navy coat edged forward again. This time, she was careful to move slowly, weaving between two parked cars until she was only a few feet away from the sergeant. "Sir," she said with a firmness that carried over the low hum of voices, "I know this woman. You need to check her ID right now." Maddox turned sharply. "Ma'am, I've told you. I've worked in the county courthouse for 37 years, she cut in. "I've seen her preside over more cases than I can count. She is not a car thief." The crowd reacted instantly. Phones pivoted toward the woman, voices whispered, "Courthouse," and "Did she say preside?" The sergeant raised an eyebrow. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Elaine Monroe," she said. "I was a clerk in criminal division for over 3 decades. Tors scribbled something on her notepad, though she kept her eyes on Maddox, as if daring him to dismiss the woman outright. Janelle's mouth curved ever so slightly, not a smile, but the acknowledgement of a witness whose testimony might finally shift the balance. "Ma'am," the sergeant said to Janelle, "is this true? You work in the courthouse?" "Yes," she said, "and I'd like the opportunity to prove exactly how." Maddox stepped forward again. "You can prove it at the station. Right now, the car." "The car," Janelle interrupted, her voice cutting cleanly through his, "is legally registered in my name. That fact will not change between here and your precinct. What will change is the scope of your department's liability for detaining me without cause." Gasps and low exclamations rippled through the crowd. Even Tors glanced briefly at the sergeant, reading his expression. He didn't look rattled, but there was a heaviness in his posture now, the weight of knowing every decision from this point forward was under a microscope. The news reporter, a woman in a crisp blazer, inched forward with her microphone extended, clearly hopping to catch more of the exchange. "Ma'am," she called out, can you tell us your name? Janelle didn't look at her, not until I've addressed the officers directly. It was the kind of line that sounded evasive to the untrained ear, but was, in fact, the most strategic answer possible under the circumstances. Behind the camera, the stabilizer operator whispered, "This is insane," to no one in particular. His viewers, now over 17,000, were flooding the comments with demands to let her speak. The sergeant adjusted his stance. "Maddox, Tors, give us a little space." Tors complied immediately, stepping back and subtly getting Maddox with her. He didn't resist, but his jaw was still set tight, like someone unwilling to admit a losing argument. Now it was just the sergeant and Janelle within arm's length, though the semicircle of the crowd felt like an invisible wall around them. "You seem to know the law," he said quietly. "I do," she replied, "well enough to know when it's being misapplied." He studied her for a long moment. "If we let you retrieve that briefcase under supervision, can you end this right now?" "Yes," she said, "but you'll need to be prepared for what you see." The way she said it, not as a threat, but as a fact, made something flicker in his expression. He wasn't sure what she meant, but part of him clearly suspected he already knew. Before he could respond, Maddox's voice rang out from behind Tors. "Sarge, I'm telling you, we have cause to impound the vehicle now." The crowd's collective groan was almost theatrical. Someone shouted, "You just can't let it go, huh?" Another voice added, "He's gonna regret this." The sergeant's shoulders stiffened. He turned just enough to project his voice. "Stand down, Maddox, that's an order." For a moment, the only sound was the faint buzz of the livestream notifications going off in rapid succession. Janelle kept her eyes on the sergeant. "You have a decision to make, and so do I. Let's both choose the one that keeps this from becoming a headline about another bad stop." From somewhere in the crowd, a clear young voice said, "It's already a headline." The sergeant almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because the kid was right. This was no longer a quiet incident in a strip mall parking lot. It was a public moment with a life of its own. "All right," he said finally, "let's see the briefcase." The air around the GTO seemed thicker now, as if the late afternoon heat had condensed into something almost tangible. The crowd leaned forward again, that invisible ring closing tighter around the scene. The sergeant's order still hung between them, but Maddox stepped forward anyway, his boots scuffing against the asphalt. "Before we go reaching into anything, I'm checking that bag myself." "That's not what we agreed to," the sergeant said evenly. Maddox's eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses. "We didn't agree to anything, Sarge. I'm the first on scene, my call." The collective sound of phones being lifted was unmistakable, dozens of people repositioning for a better angle. Even without looking at the livestream feed, Janelle knew Maddox's words had already been clipped, captioned, and sent ricocheting across social media. "You're insisting on opening a case marked with a judicial seal without a warrant," she said, her voice clear enough for every microphone in the vicinity to catch. "Are you certain that's the choice you want recorded?" Tors shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking from Maddox to the sergeant. "Sir, we all know this is risky." "Risky?" Maddox scoffed. "You think I'm worried about a seal on a briefcase? We've got probable cause." "What you've got," Janelle interrupted, her tone still calm, "is a growing number of witnesses, both here and online, who have seen no evidence of criminal behavior on my part. The only probable cause you've articulated is the color of my skin matching a vague description." The murmur in the crowd swelled into something heavier, almost a low rumble. A woman near the front said loudly, "She's right," and was answered by a ripple of agreement. The sergeant took a step toward Maddox, lowering his voice, but not his authority. "Tom, you're digging us into a hole. Let's not make it deeper." For the first time since he arrived, Maddox hesitated, not much, but enough for Janelle to see it. His right hand, which had hovered near his belt for most of the exchange, eased a fraction lower. The reporter in the blazer leaned closer to her cameraman, murmuring something as the lens adjusted. The red tally light glowed steadily now, broadcasting everything in crisp HD to whoever was tuned in live. The older woman in the navy coat, Elaine Monroe, crossed her arms and gave Maddox a look Janelle recognized from a lifetime in the legal field, the kind that could silence a witness mid-lie. "Officer Maddox," Elaine said, each syllable measured, "I sat in that courthouse for 37 years watching judges enforce the law you claim to serve. If you knew who you were talking to right now, you'd already be apologizing." "I don't apologize to suspects," Maddox shot back before he could think better of it. That line hit the crowd like a thrown stone. The reaction was immediate, shouts of "wow," and "did he just say that?" rippled outward. On the live stream, a wall of angry emojis flooded the side of the screen. The sergeant's voice was low but carried a warning edge. "That's enough, Tom." Janelle let the moment hang just long enough for its weight to settle, then spoke. "Sergeant, I will allow you to supervise as I retrieve my briefcase. You may observe every movement I make, but if anyone other than you or Officer Torres touches that case without my consent, we will have a Fourth Amendment violation before we even open it." The sergeant gave a short nod. "Understood." Maddox's mouth opened, but Torres beat him to it. "That's the smartest option we've had on the table all day." It wasn't quite a rebuke, but it landed like one. Maddox's jaw tightened, and he stepped back just enough to signal his withdrawal, at least physically, from the immediate space. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, "I want you to move slowly. Announce every action before you make it." "That's how I plan to proceed," Janelle replied. She glanced at the crowd. Every phone seemed to rise in unison, as if drawn by the gravity of the moment. The murmurs faded into silence, broken only by the distant hum of the news van's generator. Janelle straightened from the hood, keeping her hands visible. She took one step toward the driver's side door, her eyes never leaving the sergeant's. "I'm reaching into my pocket for the keys," she said. "Go ahead," he confirmed. Her fingers closed around the familiar curve of the key ring. She held it up, the GTO's crest catching the light. Then, with a deliberate slowness that seemed almost ceremonial, she turned the key in the lock. The click was audible even over the faint background noise. "Opening the door," she said. The hinge gave its low, smooth groan as she pulled it wide. The interior smelled faintly of leather polish and the vanilla air freshener she kept under the dash. She knew Maddox was craning for a view, but she kept her body angled just enough to block the direct line. "I'm leaning in to retrieve the briefcase," she said. The sergeant's gaze was fixed on her hands. Her fingers closed around the handle. For a heartbeat, she let them rest there, feeling the familiar weight and the subtle texture of the leather. Then she drew it out into the open air. The gold-embossed seal caught the sunlight fully now, throwing a brief flare into the lenses trained on her. The reaction from the crowd was immediate: gasps, murmurs, a few sharp intakes of breath. "What's that seal?" someone near the front whispered. Janelle held the briefcase by her side, not opening it yet. "Sergeant," she said, "I think it's best we discuss the contents here in view of everyone. That way there's no dispute about what is or isn't in this case." Maddox crossed his arms, but his shoulders were no longer squared with the same certainty. The fight in his posture had shifted into something more defensive, as though he sensed the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he thought. The livestream viewer count ticked upward again, 23,000 and climbing. In the scrolling comments, phrases like "that's official" and "he's done" began to dominate. The sergeant gave a short nod. "All right, let's see it." The briefcase rested against Janelle's thigh, her grip firm but relaxed. Around her, the silence had shifted from tension to something sharper: anticipation. The crowd leaned in again, a single living organism drawn toward the promise of revelation. "Announce every step," the sergeant reminded her. "I'm placing the briefcase on the hood of the car," she said, lifting it so the gold seal faced outward. The sunlight caught the embossed crest, an intricate design of scales, a sword, and the word Superior Court of California ringing its circumference. The reporter in the blazer whispered to her cameraman, Zoom in on that, and the lens adjusted with a mechanical whir. Maddox made a dismissive sound in his throat. Anyone can buy a fake seal online. Several in the crowd groaned audibly. A man near the front muttered, "Sure, buddy, and I guess she's also got a fake parking lot full of witnesses." Tor's eyes flicked to Maddox, then to the briefcase. She didn't say anything, but Janelle noticed the slight tightening of her lips. "I'm unlocking the briefcase now," Janelle said, her voice even. She turned the combination dials with deliberate slowness, each click audible in the compressed quiet. The locks popped open. She didn't lift the lid yet. Instead, she placed both hands flat on the leather for a moment, as if anchoring herself. Inside, she knew, was everything: proof of ownership, yes, but also evidence of exactly who she was. And revealing it wasn't just about clearing herself. It was about making sure every person here and every viewer online understood the weight of what had just happened. "I will open this so all can see," she said, "but I want to note for the record that I am doing so voluntarily, under the supervision of Sergeant Reynolds," he supplied. "Sergeant Reynolds," she finished, "in order to resolve an unlawful detention." That phrasing drew murmurs of approval from several corners of the crowd. Even those without legal training could hear the precision in her choice of words. She lifted the lid. The first thing visible was a leather-bound notebook, thick with handwritten pages. On top of it sat a slim folder stamped "Confidential" in red ink. Beneath that, the edge of a manila envelope peeking from under a stack of neatly clipped documents. From somewhere in the crowd, a camera shutter clicked in rapid bursts. "What's all this?" Maddox demanded, stepping forward. "These," Janelle said, keeping her voice calm, "are case files, sealed proceedings, evidence logs, things you, Officer Maddox, are not permitted to access without a court order." Tor's gaze locked on Maddox, her expression unreadable but taut. Janelle reached past the notebook and folder to a flat leather wallet tucked against the side. She lifted it with 2 fingers. "This," she said, "is what will end your uncertainty." She didn't open it right away. Instead, she turned it so the edge of a laminated card inside was barely visible. The crowd shifted forward, a collective breath drawn but not yet released. "Before I show you this," she continued, "I want everyone here to understand what has happened. I was approached, detained, and nearly had my property searched without cause, based solely on an unverified assumption tied to my appearance and the value of my car." The livestream feed erupted with comments, "Preach, this is it, watch his face." The reporter stepped closer, her microphone now within a foot of the hood. "Ma'am, can you state your name for the record?" "I can," Janelle said, "and I will, once I display this identification." Reynolds nodded once. "Go ahead." She flipped open the wallet. The sunlight struck the laminated surface, making the gold seal gleam. Beneath it, in bold type, were the words, "Hun, Janelle Harris, Judge, Superior Court, Criminal Division." The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps from the crowd, an audible "what" from somewhere near the back. The reporter's cameraman muttered an expletive under his breath, too low for broadcast, but not for those nearby to hear. Maddox's face froze. For the first time since the stop began, he didn't speak. "This identification," Janelle said clearly, angling it so the nearest cameras could capture it, "was issued by the state of California. I have served as a superior court judge for the past 14 years. I have presided over hundreds of criminal cases, many involving the same department represented here today." A wave of murmurs washed through the crowd. Some turned to each other, whispering in disbelief. Others kept their phones locked on Maddox's face, waiting for any crack in his composure. Elaine Monroe stepped forward, her own voice carrying over the buzz. "I told you," she said, looking directly at Maddox, "and you ignored me because you thought you knew better." Maddox's jaw worked, but no words emerged. His sunglasses no longer looked like shields, more like a barrier to hide behind. Janelle set the wallet down on the open briefcase, the ID still visible. "Now, Sergeant Reynolds, I trust you understand why my briefcase cannot be opened without my consent, and why Officer Maddox's approach today raises serious concerns." Reynolds nodded, his expression sober. "Understood." Tors, perhaps sensing the shift in the air, stepped closer to Janelle's side, not in solidarity exactly, but in a way that seemed to physically acknowledge her as more than a suspect. The crowd, now buzzing with energy, pressed for more. Someone shouted, "Are you gonna apologize?" It wasn't clear whether it was directed at Maddox or the department as a whole. The reporter raised her voice over the noise. "Judge Harris, will you be taking legal action?" "That," Janelle said, "depends on what happens next." Her tone carried the weight of someone accustomed to having the final say in a room. It quieted the crowd just enough for her next words to cut through. "I could walk away right now and let this be another story people talk about for a day before moving on. Or," she said, her eyes locking on Maddox, "we could use this as a moment to demand better from everyone." The livestream viewer count surged again, 29,000 and climbing. The scrolling comments alternated between outrage, vindication, and calls for Maddox's resignation. Reynolds took a slow breath. "Judge Harris, I think we should step aside to discuss." "No," she said, "we'll have that discussion right here, where everyone can see." That choice electrified the crowd. It also locked Maddox in place, making retreat without comment nearly impossible. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The summer air was warm, but the silence had a chill to it, like the moment before a gavel falls. Then the first voice broke through. "So, officer, what's your excuse now?" The question came from a man near the front, phone still trained on Maddox. Others quickly piled on. "Why'd you assume she stole the car? Was it just because she's black? You gonna apologize, or are you gonna stand there?" The volume rose, one voice feeding off another, until the noise rolled across the parking lot like a wave. Maddox's lips pressed into a hard line, but his shoulders tightened, betraying the tension creeping into his stance. The reporter stepped closer, microphone poised. "Officer Maddox, do you have a statement for the public?" Maddox glanced at Reynolds as if searching for rescue. The sergeant didn't answer, his face unreadable. "Officer," the reporter pressed, "the public is watching right now. Tens of thousands live online, local news broadcasting. What do you want them to know about your conduct today?" "I was following procedure," Maddox said, the words clipped. "Procedure," Janelle repeated, as if turning the word over in her mind. "Would you like to explain to this crowd, and the thousands watching, exactly which part of your department's written procedure states that a vague description is sufficient to detain someone without verifying basic facts?" Maddox's jaw worked again. "We had a bolo. For a blue GTO," she cut in, "with no license plate provided, no unique identifiers, and no description beyond black female, mid-40s. How many cars did you stop today that matched that description?" He hesitated. "This was the only one." Her eyebrow lifted. "Why is that?" The question hung in the air, heavy. The crowd's murmur sharpened into something more accusatory. "Because you only see a threat when it looks like me," she said, "and you acted on that assumption without considering any other possibilities." The crowd erupted, cheers, shouts, a smattering of applause. The live-stream chat exploded with comments. "Say it louder, this is what bias looks like. She's dismantling him." Tor's eyes moved between Maddox and Janelle, her expression almost pained. It wasn't loyalty to Maddox that made her tense, it was the awareness that this was no longer just about him. Every officer in the department was being represented in this moment. Elaine Monroe stepped closer to the hood, voice firm. "You humiliated a sitting judge in front of the entire community. You tried to intimidate her into giving you access to confidential legal documents. And you did it because you thought you could get away with it." "Ma'am, Maddox began, but Elaine didn't let him finish. "I've worked in that courthouse longer than you've worn that badge. I've seen officers like you come and go, thinking they're untouchable until the truth catches up. Well, it's caught up." The applause grew louder. Even the reporter had to pause her next question until the noise subsided. When it did, she turned back to Janelle. "Judge Harris, what would you like to see happen as a result of this incident?" Janelle didn't answer immediately. She let the question sit, knowing silence could be just as powerful as speech. The crowd quieted again, sensing something important was coming. "What I want," she said finally, "is for everyone here to understand that accountability isn't optional. Officer Maddox's actions today aren't just about one bad decision. They're about a mindset that sees people like me as suspects before seeing us as citizens." The reporter nodded slowly. "And in terms of consequences?" "That," Janelle said, "is a conversation we will have with the full weight of the law behind it, right here, right now." The murmur that followed was different this time, not outrage, but anticipation. Even Reynolds seemed to shift subtly, like a man preparing for impact. Maddox's head turned sharply toward her. "If you think you can just—" "I don't think," she interrupted, her tone still controlled, but carrying an edge now. "I know, because I've presided over enough misconduct cases to recognize the pattern, and I've ruled on enough civil rights claims to understand the remedies available." Reynolds cleared his throat, perhaps sensing that the crowd's mood was reaching a point of no return. "Judge Harris, let's keep this constructive." "This is constructive," she said. "It's the only way moments like this become something more than a viral clip." The reporter gestured to her cameraman, who panned to catch the reactions in the crowd, folded arms, skeptical frowns, but also nods of agreement. From the back, a young man's voice rang out, "Tell him about the lawsuits." Janelle's gaze didn't leave Maddox's face. "Do you know how many complaints have been filed against you in the past 5 years, officer?" His lips parted, but no sound came. 18, she said, 3 of which resulted in civil settlements paid by your department, 2 of which were excessive force, and 1, filed less than 2 years ago, alleging racial profiling in a traffic stop not far from here. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The reporter's eyebrows shot up. "Is that public record?" "It is now," Janelle said. Maddox's face flushed, the set of his jaw hardening into something close to panic, masked as defiance. Reynolds stepped in slightly, voice lower now. "Judge Harris." "No, Sergeant," she said. "We are not moving this out of public view. Every moment until now has happened in front of witnesses. It will end that way too." The older woman beside her nodded, arms still crossed. "Good, let him feel the eyes on him." Torres glanced at Reynolds again, then at the swirling mix of media and community members pressing closer. "Sir, this isn't going away quietly," she said under her breath. "I know," he replied, equally low. Janelle's voice rose again, carrying over the murmurs. "Officer Maddox, you've told this crowd you were following procedure. I'm telling you, and them, that your procedure is broken, and if you want to salvage anything from this, the first step is to admit it." The pause that followed was long enough for someone in the crowd to shout, "Well." Maddox shifted his weight, but his voice, when it came, was barely above the ambient noise. "I was doing my job." "Your job," she said, "is to uphold the law, not to twist it, not to guess at it, and certainly not to let bias dictate its application." Another cheer went up. The live-stream chat scrolled faster than anyone could read, a wall of support for Janelle and condemnation for Maddox. Reynolds exhaled heavily. "Judge Harris, if you're ready to outline the next steps, we should." "I am," she said, "and they start with this department deciding whether it's willing to be part of the solution." The murmur of the crowd dimmed again as Janelle straightened her posture. Her voice had been steady all along, but now it took on a cadence that made the air feel tighter, measured pauses, deliberate emphasis, the unmistakable rhythm of a judge preparing to issue a ruling. "Officer Maddox," she began, "I am going to give you 3 possible courses of action. Each one carries different consequences, and the choice will be entirely yours. You will make it here, in front of this community, this department, and the thousands of people already watching live. And once you make it, it will be binding." Reynolds shifted slightly, recognizing the weight of what she was about to do. Tors kept her gaze fixed on Janelle, as if mentally bracing for what was coming. The reporter raised her microphone higher, her cameraman zooming in. Every person in the semicircle of onlookers leaned closer without realizing it. Option 1, Janelle said, her voice carrying clearly to the back of the crowd. You submit to immediate suspension, pending an independent investigation into your conduct today and your prior complaints. That investigation will include review by a civilian oversight board, as well as referral to the district attorney for potential charges. You will face the full legal process, just as any citizen accused of misconduct would. A ripple went through the onlookers, some murmurs approving, others sharp intakes of breath at the severity. Option 2, she continued, you accept a voluntary demotion, complete 200 hours of certified bias and de-escalation training, and participate as a case study in police academy reform. You will testify before the state legislature about the dangers of profiling, using your own actions as the central example. This option allows you to remain in the profession, but under a lens of scrutiny and with the obligation to educate others. That earned a few audible yes calls from the crowd, mixed with skeptical mutters. And option 3, Janelle said, her gaze steady on him, you retire immediately with your current benefits intact. You acknowledge that your methods and mindset are incompatible with modern policing. You remove yourself from any future role in law enforcement or security services, and you step aside without a prolonged investigation. By the time she finished, the silence was absolute. Even the hum of the news van generator seemed to have faded under the weight of her words. You have 60 seconds, she said, to make your choice. The clock starts now. The reporter's cameraman panned to Maddox, his lens framing the officer in tight focus. The effect was almost cinematic, Maddox framed by the glare of the sun, the gleam of the GTO behind him, and the ring of witnesses closing in. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. From somewhere behind the news crew, a voice shouted, "Take the training." Someone else countered, "No, get him out for good." The live stream chat was a flood of split opinion, half pushing for the educational route, half demanding full removal. Tor's voice was low but audible enough to make it into a few nearby recordings. "Think about your family," she said. Maddox's jaw worked as if chewing over something bitter. He glanced toward Reynolds, but the sergeant didn't move to intervene. 30 seconds, Janelle said evenly. Elaine Monroe crossed her arms tighter, her stare fixed on Maddox like a physical weight. "You've already cost yourself the respect of this community. Don't cost yourself your last scrap of dignity too." The crowd shifted, a living tide of expectation. Every breath, every shuffle of a foot on asphalt sounded louder in the pause. The reporter held her microphone like it was a detonator, poised for the instant he spoke. Maddox's shoulders dropped slightly, the set of his stance changing from rigid defiance to something closer to resignation. 15 seconds, Janelle said. A long exhale left him. He glanced once at the GTO, then back at her. "I'll take option 2, he said finally, voice rough. "The demotion, the training, the testimony." The reaction was immediate, cheers from some, stunned silence from others. Phones tilted upward to capture the moment, the exact second a police officer publicly chose reform over denial. The live stream chat lit up with historic, he admitted it, and change starts here. Janelle gave a single, measured nod. "So noted. The terms will be drafted today and signed within 72 hours. Your compliance will be monitored by both this department and an independent oversight committee." Maddox gave a stiff nod in return, though his expression was hard to read. Reynolds stepped forward now, his voice pitched for both the crowd and the cameras. "I will personally oversee the execution of these terms. This incident will trigger a department-wide review of our procedures, as well as the expansion of training requirements." That earned another wave of applause from parts of the crowd. Even those still skeptical seemed to feel a shift, if not closure, then at least a direction. Janelle closed the briefcase, locking it with a decisive click. "Then we proceed," she said. "But remember, accountability is not a one-day event. It's an ongoing commitment, and I'll be watching." The words didn't carry malice, they carried certainty. The energy in the parking lot shifted the moment Maddox's choice left his lips. Relief for some, vindication for others, and a deep, simmering satisfaction for many who had been recording from the first moments of the stop. But Janelle didn't let the moment soften into celebration. She stayed by the hood of the GTO, the briefcase closed and locked, her voice carrying across the semicircle of onlookers. "Accountability," she said, "is only the first step. For change to last, it must be embedded in policy, measured, reviewed, and enforced. So before we leave here today, I'm going to outline exactly what reforms will follow from this incident." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd, the hush of people leaning in. She turned slightly toward Reynolds. "These reforms will apply to your department immediately. I'll also be forwarding them to the county board and the state judicial committee for broader implementation. They're designed to protect both the community and the officers who serve it." The reporter gestured sharply to her cameraman to capture every word. The live stream chat began filling with "Listen up, here comes the plan, and this is how you do it." "First," Janelle began, "body cameras will be required for every single traffic stop, without exception. The footage will be uploaded and reviewed by a civilian oversight board, not just internal affairs. That board will include community members, civil rights advocates, and legal professionals with subpoena power. If you are confident in your conduct, you should welcome the record it creates." A wave of applause rolled through the front rows. Even Tors gave a small nod, her expression tight but approving. "Second," she continued, "bias training will not be a one-time workshop or a checkbox on a compliance form. It will be ongoing, quarterly sessions led by community organizations and subject matter experts. The training will focus on recognizing implicit bias, de-escalating tense situations, and ensuring that an officer's first assumption is never based on race or appearance." Someone in the back shouted, "About time." The sentiment echoed in the scrolling comments online. "Real reform right here, hope they listen, quarterly is smart." "Third," Janelle said, her tone sharpening, "your department will implement a transparency program. Every month, data on all stops, searches, and arrests will be published publicly. That data will include the race, age, and gender of each individual, the stated reason for the stop, and the outcome. Patterns of disproportionate enforcement will be addressed immediately, and those patterns will be reviewed by the oversight board." Maddox shifted uncomfortably, but Janelle didn't look at him. Her focus was on Reynolds now, as if to ensure the terms were heard and understood at the highest level. "Fourth," she said, "there will be a clear and accessible community complaint process. Complaints will no longer disappear into an internal review folder. They will be logged, tracked, and visible to the public, along with the resolution. When you work in service to the public, you answer to them." A fresh swell of applause rose from the crowd, accompanied by a few cheers. The reporter seized a moment to ask, "Judge Harris, are these measures something you've implemented before in other jurisdictions?" "Yes," Janelle said without hesitation. "I've worked on oversight committees that have enacted similar systems, and I can tell you, when they are applied consistently, they rebuild trust. They make communities safer, and they protect good officers from being lumped in with those who abuse their authority." Tor's gaze flicked toward Reynolds again, her voice low but audible. "Sir, we could actually use this. Half our complaints come from misunderstandings that proper documentation could clear up." Reynolds gave a curt nod, but didn't interrupt. "Fifth," Janelle went on, "all officers will be evaluated not just on arrest numbers or call response times, but on community engagement and conflict resolution. Your promotions will depend as much on how you interact with the public as on how you enforce the law." The comment feed online lit up. "This is the metric, end the quota system, performance not equal to harassment." "Finally," she said, "there will be an annual public forum where the oversight board, the department, and the community meet face to face. No podiums, no scripts, just open dialogue. We can't fix what we won't talk about. The crowd responded with its loudest applause yet. Even the news crew's cameraman lowered his rig for a second to clap. Janelle let the noise rise and settle before speaking again. These measures aren't punishments, they are safeguards. They ensure that when officers do their jobs correctly, they have nothing to fear, and when they don't, the public doesn't have to fight for years to see justice done. Elaine Monroe stepped forward again, her voice firm. Judge Harris, I've seen enough promises over the years to know most fade as soon as the cameras are off. What's going to make this different? Janelle didn't miss a beat. The difference, she said, is that this isn't a closed-door agreement. The terms have been stated here, publicly, in front of the people they will serve, and they will be written into a formal memorandum of understanding within 72 hours, signed by the department and the oversight board, and published online for anyone to read. The livestream comments exploded. That's binding, put it in writing, public record equals no excuses. Reynolds finally spoke, his voice measured. Judge Harris, on behalf of the department, I agree to these terms. I'll see to it that the memorandum is drafted and signed within the time frame you've stated. There was a moment's pause as the weight of his words settled. The reaction from the crowd was mixed, cheers from some, wary nods from others, but the acknowledgement carried significance. Janelle gave a single, deliberate nod. Then we have an agreement. The reporter turned to Maddox, microphone poised. Officer Maddox, do you accept the conditions outlined here, including your own demotion and required participation in the reform process? He hesitated, clearly aware of the cameras trained on him. Yes, he said finally, the word sounding like it had been dragged out of him. Torres exhaled quietly. Elaine Monroe's arms unfolded, her stance softening just slightly. And so it begins, Janelle said, closing the loop of her remarks. Not with a headline, not with an apology, but with a plan. It started as a ripple, small at first, barely noticeable in the chatter of the crowd. A few people glanced at their phones, their faces shifting from curiosity to astonishment. Then the ripple became a wave. Judge Harris had appeared on the trending sidebar of 2 major social media platforms before anyone had even left the lot. By the time the news van's live feed cut to its first commercial break, the hashtags were multiplying. Judge Harris, accountability now, bias in blue, and the one that would stick for days, the GTO incident. A teenage girl near the front squealed, turning her phone to show a friend. We're on the top trend list, like worldwide, she said. Her friend immediately started taking screenshots, sending them to group chats as if she were capturing proof of witnessing history. Across the lot, the young man with the stabilizer kept his live stream running, the viewer count ticking past 50,000. If you're just joining, he said into his mic, we've got a judge who just handed down 3 options to the officer who profiled her, and he took the demotion and training. You can't make this stuff up. The scrolling comments had taken on a life of their own. Some were jubilant, YSSS, she's my hero, while others were more analytical. This is how reform should look in real time. Notice how she never lost her cool. Links to the stream were being shared by verified accounts, each share multiplying its reach. In the middle of the semicircle, the news crew's producer received a call from the station's assignment desk. Her eyes widened. We are live to national next segment, she mouthed to the reporter. The reporter's hand tightened on the microphone, her smile tightening into something sharper, aware that the audience was about to grow exponentially. Elaine Monroe was suddenly surrounded by 3 people at once, all asking variations of the same question. Did you really know her before this? She answered them patiently, though with a pointed undertone. I've known her since before some of you were born, and she's always been exactly who she showed you today. Janelle noticed the shift too. Moments ago, the cameras had been aimed squarely at her face, tracking every flicker of expression. Now they were swinging in arcs to catch the crowd's reactions, the officer's posture, the handshake Reynolds extended toward her after agreeing to the reforms. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She didn't need to check to know it was more missed calls, probably from the courthouse, perhaps even from the state press office now. She left it there. The story was unfolding here, and this moment was already writing itself into the record. Tors stepped to one side, pulling out her own phone. Janelle caught the faint reflection of the trending hashtags on the screen before Tors turned away to take a call. "Maddox," Reynolds said quietly to the officer, still standing rigidly near the edge of the crowd. "You need to make yourself scarce before this becomes a press scrum you can't get out of." "I'm fine," Maddox muttered, but his eyes were fixed on nothing in particular. He looked like a man already rehearsing answers for a meeting that hadn't yet been scheduled. The producer tapped the reporter on the arm. "We are live in 30 seconds to GMA affiliate," she said. "Get her on the record again." The reporter turned immediately to Janelle. "Judge Harris, national viewers are joining us now. For those who are just tuning in, can you summarize what happened here today in your own words?" Janelle let her eyes sweep the crowd once before answering, knowing full well every pause, every measured syllable was being broadcast. "Today," she said, "we saw what happens when assumptions go unchecked. We saw how quickly bias can turn an everyday moment into a public confrontation. And we saw that accountability, when chosen, can lead to change. This is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of one." The reporter's nod was almost imperceptible, but her smile reached her eyes. "Thank you, Judge Harris." Phones chimed throughout the crowd, alerts from news apps pushing breaking headlines. California judge confronts officer over profiling, wins public commitment to reform. Somewhere behind the news crew, a man in a baseball cap muttered to his friend, "This is gonna be on every channel tonight." He was right. In the space of 20 minutes, clips from the live stream had been reposted by 3 major civil rights organizations, 2 celebrity accounts with millions of followers, and at least 1 sitting senator who tweeted, "This is why we fight for oversight and transparency in law enforcement." In the parking lot, the effect was tangible. People were no longer just witnesses, they were participants in something growing beyond their control. Strangers were swapping contact info to share footage, checking battery levels on their devices, and angling for better shots in case something else happened before it was over. Elaine leaned toward Janelle. "They'll be calling you for interviews before you even get back to your chambers." Janelle allowed herself the faintest smile. "Let's hope they call for reform before they call for quotes." The news van's satellite dish rotated slightly, locking in a stronger signal. The crew's monitors lit with incoming feeds, split screens showing commentary from studio anchors now discussing the incident in real time. Tors approached Reynolds. "Sir, I just got a ping. This is already on CNN's front page online. They've clipped the part where she lays out the 3 options." Reynolds didn't flinch, not surprised. By now, the livestream viewers had surpassed 70,000. The young man with the stabilizer kept one eye on his phone and one on the scene. "They're saying this clip's gonna be in training videos," he said to no one in particular. And still, people kept arriving. Shoppers who had been inside the plaza emerged to find the crowd doubled, drawn by the sound of applause and the glow of camera lights. Some didn't even know exactly what they were witnessing yet, but within minutes, someone had filled them in and phones were raised again. One woman in a denim jacket told her companion, "I just watched this in the food court live stream and ran out here. It's different in person, you can feel it." The comment threads online reflected the same sentiment. Watching live is one thing, but being there must feel electric. Janelle, for her part, remained steady. She answered another question from the reporter about the timeline for implementing reforms, then turned to speak briefly with Reynolds about drafting the memorandum. Every movement felt intentional, like she knew every camera angle would be dissected later. Somewhere near the back of the lot, a car horn blared twice, a reminder that traffic was still trying to move around the periphery of the scene. But the center of it was immovable now, a knot of attention that wouldn't untangle until the moment burned itself out. The producer got another call, her free hand shooting into the air with a thumbs up. "We've got confirmation. Anderson Cooper wants the segment tonight," she said, loud enough for more than one microphone to catch. The crowd reacted with a fresh burst of chatter. The live stream chat feed reacted faster. National primetime. It's over for him. She's gonna be everywhere. This is history in the making. In a quiet moment between questions, Janelle finally pulled her phone from her pocket. Dozens of missed calls, multiple texts from colleagues, one from a longtime friend that simply read, "Proud of you, watching now." She tucked the phone away without replying. The work in front of her wasn't done yet. Not here, not in this moment that was still unfolding under the heat of the afternoon sun and the brighter heat of public scrutiny. Somewhere a new hashtag began to climb the trending list alongside the GTO incident, Judge on the Street. By nightfall, it would be the one most replayed in highlight reels, but for now, it was just another sign that the story had outgrown the asphalt beneath their feet. The heat of the moment began to ease, replaced by the low murmur of conversations drifting toward their natural end. The thick semicircle of bodies loosened. Some people stepped back to check their phones for updates, others turned toward their cars. A few lingered at the edges, unwilling to let go of the adrenaline that had kept them anchored here. Janelle closed her briefcase with a final, deliberate click and slid it into the passenger seat of the GTO. She didn't start the car, didn't even reach for the ignition. She knew enough about moments like these to understand that leaving too quickly would feel like an escape, and she had no intention of letting anyone believe she was retreating. The reporter, satisfied that the main soundbites had been captured, shook Janelle's hand and stepped away, her cameraman following. They were already talking to the producer about cutting a package for the evening news. Elaine Monroe lingered near the hood, her eyes still sharp despite the afternoon's heat. "You handled that exactly the way I knew you would," she said quietly. Janelle allowed herself a small exhale. "You were a steady anchor," she replied. "I saw you in the crowd, and I knew someone in here understood the stakes." "Always," Elaine said, "and now the rest of them do too." Across the lot, Maddox stood with his hands on his hips, his body angled slightly away from the GTO, as if keeping distance would somehow make the cameras forget him. A younger officer, not Tor's, approached him with a tentative pat on the shoulder. Maddox shrugged it off. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but his jaw was tight, a muscle ticking every few seconds. Reynolds made his way over, his stride steady but heavy. "Judge Harris," he said, "I'll be in touch by tomorrow about the memorandum draft. We'll need to coordinate with your office to make sure the oversight board parameters are in writing exactly as you stated." "They will be," she said. "No deviations." "I understand." He glanced over his shoulder at Maddox, then back to her. "You should know he's not taking this well." "I'm not here to manage his comfort," Janelle replied. "I'm here to manage accountability." Reynolds gave a single nod. "Fair enough." Torres approached next, a faint sheen of sweat on her forehead. "Judge Harris, I wanted to say, not all of us operate like that. I've seen bad stops before, but watching this unfold, it was a wake-up call. For me, for a lot of us." "I hope you remember that feeling," Janelle said. "Reform isn't a theory, it's something you carry into every shift." Torres nodded, her eyes holding Janelle's for an extra beat before she turned to help guide the remaining stragglers away from the scene. By now, the crowd had thinned enough that the underlying noises of the plaza began to re-emerge, the hum of idling cars, the occasional bark of laughter from the cafe patio, the metallic clatter of a shopping cart rolling free across the pavement. But scattered clusters still paused to take one last photo, to point out the GTO, to murmur about the judge in tones that blended awe with respect. Janelle leaned against the car for a moment, taking in the shift. The lens of public scrutiny was still trained on her, but now it felt less like a searchlight and more like a spotlight. Elaine stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You know the calls are going to come from every direction now, press, advocacy groups, maybe even state leadership. They're going to want you to make this a bigger fight." "It already is," Janelle said, "but the fight has to stay tethered to real policy, not just headlines. I'm not here to be a symbol, I'm here to be effective." Elaine's mouth curved. "You can be both, and you probably will be, whether you like it or not." Not far away, Maddox finally moved. He approached slowly, hands now hanging loose at his sides, but his gait lacked the confidence he had carried earlier. He stopped a few feet short of the GTO. "Judge Harris," he said, voice low enough to avoid carrying beyond the immediate space. I'm not going to pretend I agree with everything you said out there, but I'll do what I said I'd do." "That's all I expect," she said. "Follow through." He gave a stiff nod, then turned and walked toward the patrol car where another officer was waiting. The crowd didn't notice his departure. Most eyes were still on Janelle, but she did. Reynolds came back once more, his voice pitched for privacy. "We'll have internal discussions tonight. I'll make sure the commitment stands." "Good," she said, "because if it doesn't, I won't need a crowd to hold you accountable. I'll use the courts." His lips twitched, not quite a smile but an acknowledgement. Understood. A light breeze moved through the lot, cooling the air just enough to carry away some of the afternoon's heat. The sun had shifted westward, throwing longer shadows from the remaining vehicles. The last of the media began to pack up, the news van's satellite dish lowering with a mechanical sigh. The hum of the generator died, replaced by the quieter rhythm of the plaza settling back into its usual weekend patterns. Janelle opened the driver's door but didn't step inside right away. Instead, she took one final look at the space where the crowd had stood, the invisible outline of where everything had happened. In her mind, she marked it as a place she might pass again someday, a place where a moment of humiliation had been turned into a platform for reform. Elaine reached out, resting a hand lightly on her forearm. "Go make the calls you've been avoiding, and get that memorandum locked down before anyone thinks they can rewrite it." "I will," Janelle said. As Elaine walked toward her own car, Janelle finally slid into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of leather and faint vanilla wrapped around her. She placed her hands on the wheel, the same hands that had been flat against the hood less than an hour ago, and let herself breathe for a moment. Through the windshield, she could still see Reynolds speaking quietly with Torres, both of them occasionally glancing her way. Beyond them, Maddox's patrol car pulled out of the lot, its departure unremarked by anyone except her. She started the GTO, the engines purr low and steady. A few people nearby turned at the sound, offering small nods or waves. Janelle returned the nods, then eased the car into gear. The tires rolled slowly over the same stretch of pavement where the crowd had gathered, past the spot where she had stood her ground. By the time she reached the exit, the plaza looked almost ordinary again, shoppers moving between stores, the faint music of a busker drifting from the far end. Only the occasional raised phone or lingering glance reminded her of the weight the space had carried moments ago. As she turned onto the main road, she knew the parking lot scene was over, but the story was only beginning. The calls would come, the scrutiny would come, and she would be ready for both. By the time Janelle pulled into her driveway, the sun had already begun its slow descent, washing the sky in amber. The GTO's engine ticked quietly as it cooled, the soft sound of home after the noise of the afternoon. But the quiet was deceptive. Her phone was still vibrating every few minutes, a steady drumbeat of attention that hadn't let up since she'd left the plaza. She stepped inside, set her briefcase on the entry table, and slipped off her blazer. The stillness of the house wrapped around her for only a few seconds before the phone buzzed again, this time with the distinct chime of her courthouse line forwarding to her cell. "Judge Harris," a crisp voice said when she answered. "This is she." "This is Karen from CNN's booking team. We'd like to have you live tonight on Anderson Cooper 360. We can arrange for a remote studio feed or a satellite truck to come to you." Janelle didn't say yes right away. "Email me the details, Karen. I'll review my schedule." "Of course, but just so you know, this segment will be the lead." After hanging up, she glanced at the growing list of unread messages. Local outlets, national outlets, advocacy groups, former law school classmates she hadn't heard from in years. The subject lines blurred into each other. "Powerful moment today. Need your voice on this. Please call back ASAP." She poured herself a glass of water before answering the next one. This time, it was a producer from Good Morning America offering her the first slot in tomorrow's show. Then came a request from NPR for a taped interview tonight to air in the morning. Janelle listened to each pitch, jotting notes in her leather-bound notebook. She knew better than to accept everything. Attention was a finite resource, and the wrong placement could dilute the message she'd fought to define in the parking lot. When the phone finally stopped buzzing for a few minutes, she took the chance to call her clerk. "Emily, I'm going to need you to clear my docket tomorrow morning. Push all hearings to the afternoon." "Understood," Emily said. "I saw the live stream. Judge, you were incredible." "Thank you, but the work's not done. The memorandum needs to be drafted tonight." She hung up and moved to her home office, the one room in the house that always smelled faintly of paper and ink. The walls were lined with law books, but the desk was clean except for her laptop, her notebook, and a single framed photo of her parents. She opened her laptop, drafting bullet points for the oversight reforms she had outlined in the plaza. Each one was expanded into enforceable language, deadlines, enforcement mechanisms, reporting structures. She didn't want Reynolds or anyone else to have room to water it down. Half an hour into her work, another call came in, this one from a number she recognized. "Janelle, it's Senator Whitaker." "Senator, I've been watching the clips all afternoon. What you did today was exactly what we've been trying to push through committee for months. I'd like you to testify at the next hearing on policing reform." Her pen tapped the desk lightly. "Send me the details. If it aligns with the reforms we discussed today, I'll consider it." "It will," Whitaker assured her, "and you'll have my office's full support." After the call ended, she leaned back in her chair, staring at the notes she'd been writing. The scope of the moment was expanding faster than even she'd anticipated. Another ping from her phone drew her attention, a text from Elaine Monroe. "Local radio is already calling this the GTO doctrine. Thought you'd like to know." Janelle smiled faintly at that, but she didn't let herself dwell on it. Instead, she called Elaine. "Just checking in," Elaine said when she answered. "You holding up?" "I'm fine, tired, focused." "Good, don't let the noise pull you off course. The cameras are gone, but the real fight is the paperwork." "I know," Janelle said. "That's why I'm getting it done now." They spoke for a few more minutes before hanging up. The house was quiet again, save for the faint hum of her refrigerator and the muted buzz of another incoming email. At 8 o'clock sharp, she connected to a remote feed for a pre-recorded interview with NPR. The host's questions were calm, deliberate, giving her space to explain the legal framework for the reforms. Janelle kept her answers precise, avoiding the kind of soundbite that could be twisted out of context. When it was over, she didn't linger to listen to the playback. She went straight back to the memorandum draft, filling in legal citations where she knew they would carry weight with the department's attorneys. By the time the CNN producer emailed her the evening rundown, the draft was nearly complete. She reviewed the interview outline they'd sent, 3 questions about the incident, 2 about the reforms, 1 about her personal background. She decided she would answer the first 5 and politely decline the last. This wasn't about her biography, it was about the system. As she set her pen down, her eyes drifted to the framed photo on her desk again. Her father's hand was resting on her shoulder in the picture, his expression proud but steady. She remembered his words from years ago, "Power is not in the title, Janelle, it's in what you do with it." Her phone buzzed one more time before she shut it off for the night, a message from her clerk confirming that the morning docket had been cleared. She allowed herself a long breath, then stood, stretching the stiffness from her shoulders. The house was still and dim now, the only light coming from the desk lamp pooling over her papers. The fight ahead would be long. But tonight, she had done exactly what she had set out to do, turned a moment of confrontation into a blueprint for change, and set that blueprint in motion before the dust had even settled. The morning light in the studio was unforgiving, bright, white, and calculated to make every pore visible on high-definition cameras. But Janelle sat under it without flinching, her posture perfect, her expression calm. The set around her was quiet except for the murmur of the producers behind the cameras, checking audio levels and teleprompter feeds. She'd been up since 5. The driver from the network had arrived at her house just before dawn, a black sedan idling in the driveway while she sipped her coffee and mentally rehearsed her talking points. She'd chosen a navy blazer, sharp, neutral, authoritative, and had pinned her hair back to keep it from becoming a distraction. The makeup artist had worked quickly, dusting away the shine from the early start, but leaving her features natural. "You've got a strong face for TV," she'd said softly, almost like a reassurance. Now, as the floor manager gave her the 3-minute warning, Janelle glanced at the stack of note cards in her lap. She wouldn't use them. They were more for mental security than anything, but each bullet point was written in the same deliberate hand as the memorandum she'd finished the night before. 2 minutes, the floor manager said. The host, seated across from her, leaned in slightly. "We'll start with the plaza incident, then move into the reforms you outlined. You'll have about 4 minutes in total, so feel free to be concise." Concise was her natural state. She nodded once, understood. At the 1-minute mark, her phone, set to silent, buzzed in her pocket. She didn't need to check it to know the messages were piling up. Her clerk had already texted once to say the courthouse steps were swarmed with local press. 30 seconds. The red tally light on the main camera blinked on, and the host's practiced smile widened. "Good morning. Our top story today, the confrontation between a California judge and a police officer accused of racial profiling, has gone viral, sparking nationwide discussion about law enforcement accountability. Joining us now, Judge Janelle Harris." The camera cut to her. She inclined her head politely. "Good morning. Judge Harris, for those who haven't seen the full footage, can you briefly describe what happened yesterday?" She kept her voice even. "I was stopped by an officer who believed I matched the description of a car thief. That belief was based solely on the color of my skin and the make of my car. Instead of escalating, I chose to address the issue publicly, in real time, with the community present. The goal wasn't to embarrass anyone, it was to create accountability in the moment it was most needed." The host nodded. "And you presented that officer with 3 options." "Yes," Janelle said. "Option 1, full suspension pending investigation. Option 2, voluntary demotion with mandatory training and public testimony. Option 3, immediate retirement." He chose the second. "And then you outlined a series of reforms for the department. Can you summarize those for us?" She did, point by point. Body cameras reviewed by a civilian board, quarterly bias training, public reporting of stop data, a transparent complaint process, performance metrics tied to community engagement, and an annual public forum. She spoke clearly, avoiding jargon but never softening the legal weight behind the measures. The host glanced toward the camera again. "Some are calling this the GTO doctrine. Are you prepared to see it adopted more broadly?" "If it works," Janelle said, "I welcome that, but it has to be implemented with integrity. Policy on paper means nothing without enforcement." They moved quickly through the rest of the questions, the clock running faster than it felt. When the segment ended, the host thanked her on air, then leaned in off-camera. "That was excellent. You'll be seeing this replayed all day." Backstage, a producer intercepted her with a clipboard. "We've got CBS calling for a noon slot, and MSNBC wants you for a panel tonight. Do you want to commit now or wait for your team to vet?" "I'll have my clerk coordinate," Janelle said, already moving toward the exit. Outside the studio, the cool air hit her cheeks like a reset button. A small knot of people had gathered near the curb, some media, some just passers-by who recognized her from the morning's broadcast. One woman in a red scarf stepped forward. "Judge Harris, I saw the live stream yesterday. My son's a public defender. What you did, it matters. It gives us hope." Janelle thanked her, pausing long enough to make it feel personal before stepping into the waiting car. The ride to her next stop, an NPR studio for a longer-form interview, was quiet except for the faint ping of her phone as notifications slipped past her filters. She glanced at the screen once. The hashtags were still trending, but now there were op-eds attached, headlines like "A Judge Shows Us How to Confront Bias Without Violence" and "The Blueprint for Real Police Reform." At NPR, the questions were deeper, less about the viral moment and more about the systemic issues behind it. She spoke about her years on the bench, the patterns she'd seen, the resistance to change, and why she believed public accountability had to be tied to enforceable measures. By the time she left, her voice was steady, but her throat felt raw from talking. She declined a lunch invitation from one of the producers, choosing instead to head back to her office at the courthouse. When she arrived, the front steps were just as her clerk had described, lined with cameras and reporters calling her name. She didn't stop for questions, simply walked through the main doors with a small nod. Inside, Emily was waiting. "The draft memorandum's ready for your review. Reynolds' office has already agreed to the language on points 1 through 4. They're hesitating on point 5. "They'll accept point 5, Janelle said, scanning the document. "It's non-negotiable." She made the edits in red ink, initialed them, and handed the packet back. "Send this to them now, and make sure it's time-stamped." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of calls, quick statements, and one more national interview, this time a panel discussion where she was joined by a former police chief and a civil rights attorney. The conversation was spirited, but Janelle kept it anchored in specifics, always circling back to the reforms themselves rather than the personalities involved. By the time she left the courthouse, the winter light was fading, the day's energy finally dipping. In the quiet of her car, she allowed herself one long, slow breath. The national stage was hers for the moment, but she knew how quickly moments could pass. The work now was making sure the reforms outlasted the news cycle, turning the spotlight into a steady light, one that would keep shining where it was most needed. What happened in that plaza wasn't just about one stop, one officer, or one judge. It was about a moment where the script of everyday injustice was flipped, right there in public, with no room for spin or retreat. Janelle didn't raise her voice, didn't resort to spectacle. She used the tools of her profession, precision, clarity, and the full weight of the law to turn a power imbalance into a blueprint for change. But moments like this don't just happen. They're built on years of experience, courage in the face of risk, and the choice to act when silence would be easier. And here's the truth. If we want these moments to become more than rare exceptions, we can't just watch them. We have to carry them forward. Ask yourself, what would you do if you saw bias playing out in front of you? Would you turn away or would you step in? Accountability isn't the job of a judge alone, or a journalist, or a handful of activists. It's a collective responsibility. Every witness matters. Every recording matters. Every refusal to let a false assumption stand unchallenged matters. And while not everyone can stand in a plaza with a briefcase and command a crowd, everyone can demand policies that make those moments less necessary. Push for body cameras. Insist on transparent data. Support oversight boards that have real teeth. Challenge your leaders to commit to reforms that can't be quietly shelved when attention fades. Because here's what the GTO incident really showed us. Change doesn't wait for permission. It happens when someone decides that enough isn't just a feeling, it's a line drawn in public with the whole world watching. So don't just share this story, live it forward. Be the person who turns a bystander moment into a turning point. The more of us who do, the less we'll need heroes to clean up the mess after the fact. The road to real reform isn't short, but it's wide enough for all of us to walk it if we are willing to start.